One of the real highlights of the show here as part of Gold of the Great Steppe, which is a burial of a young teenage Saka man, in fact he was a boy, a teenager, who was buried over 2,700 years ago. And his burial laid intact until 2018 when it was discovered by archaeologists. And it's exceptional really because this is only the second time that the Saka burial has been found undisturbed and unlooted. And the last one was found in 1969. So it's a really incredible discovery on the territory of Kazakhstan, but also in terms of our understanding of Saka archaeology and the way in which they buried their dead. The Saka chose to bury their dead in dramatic and beautiful landscapes, and they created huge burial mounds known as kurgans, some of which could be as tall as a 3-story building, and they still remain visible on the landscape today. So the young teenage warrior whose burial was discovered intact was buried in this burial mound you can see here behind me, which is known rather unromantically as Kurgan 4 of Group 2 at Yelike-Sazi, which is the cemetery where he was buried. So one of the really big expressions of the wealth and status of this young teenager is this wonderful gold torque which was placed around his neck. The torque itself is solid gold. It's made from a single rod of gold that was twisted into shape, and it weighs over 300 grams. And we can see under the microscope that there are points at which the gold actually started to split as it was created under this incredible torsion during its creation. We also have a tantalizing glimpse at what might have happened to the torque before it was buried. There's some very slight signs of wear on the torque as well, which might indicate that it was worn before it was buried with the archer and may have had a role in his life. So why are we calling this teenager the archer? Well, the reason is because he was buried with a bow case and quiver, which were combined into a special piece of equipment called a goritos. And we can see we have a huge long plaque, which is a sheet of gold that was shaped probably over a wooden mould. And then it had an end piece that's this pear-shaped piece here, which has a wonderful heraldic design that was picked out using granulation, which is when little balls of gold are soldered onto this sheet of gold. And also precious stones. We have turquoise, we have lapis lazuli as well. So this is obviously part of the sort of fashion and the style of creating a bow case. This pear-shaped piece has a ridge down the middle, which was probably used to denote the division of the quiver for storing 2 different types of arrows. Although it's interesting to note that the 40 arrows this archer was buried with are all of the same style. One of the incredibly beautiful pieces which really show the animal style is this stag. The stag himself is shown really beautifully with his muscles straining. His legs are folded up under him as though he's sort of in a flying gallop. And taking a closer look at him, it really shows that the Saka understood these animals and they understood the physiology. And it's worth just taking the time to look at his neck muscles and his leg muscles and see the way in which it's been so sympathetically and beautifully created by the Saka. We're down at the feet of the archer now, and we're looking at another status symbol, but one that's very different to the torque which was around his neck. And these are over 1,700 tiny gold beads, which were made by folding or rolling a very thin sheet of gold into beads which are around 1 millimeter in diameter. And these were found around his foot bones where there was a shadow which indicated that they were actually sewn onto shoes. And this is really fascinating because why would you have such fancy shoes? Now, the reason why we think the shoes were adorned with these tiny beads is because if you are sitting up on the horse, that means that your feet are at eye level with those who are probably standing on the ground and are not the elite members on the horses. So we believe that this is a symbol not only of his status, but also the fact that he's showing them off to somebody else, and his shoes are actually being used to show his status and his wealth and possibly his power in society. The bow and arrows were not the only weapons that this young archer was buried with. And on his right-hand side, he was buried with a bronze dagger with a beautiful wooden scabbard that was overlaid with gold sheets, and again decorated with the same gold granulation technique. that we see on the Goritos end piece. And this really shows the skill they had in creating objects from a variety of different metals and materials. The teenage archer's burial is only half of the story for Kurgan 4 of the Yelekay cemetery. While his burial lay intact within the burial mound, his companion in death, the teenage girl who was about 13 or 14 and was a close female relative of his, quite possibly his sister, was almost completely looted when grave robbers came in and took away nearly all of the artifacts that she was buried with. We can only imagine what her grave may have looked like and all of the artifacts that may have been there with it. But we do have this one tiny bone object. It's not gold, it's very, very small, but it's beautifully made, and it's a small weaving tablet with 9 holes drilled in it. So it was probably used in the creation of rather beautiful bands of textile that would have adorned clothing. But it's a really poignant reminder of all of the information that we have lost in archaeology to things like looting. The female, the young girl, the teenager, was obviously buried with other artifacts. And it makes us wonder about her story and how her story relates to the Saka world. Was she also buried with a bow and arrow and weaponry? Was she a skilled weaver, and was that part of her calling and creation? What other things did her family want her to know about? And it's really important in archaeology, when we're interpreting all of this impressive and beautiful, wonderful artifacts, to remember that there are so many things that we don't know, and so many of our interpretations depend on the role of chance, but also our own assumptions and our own understanding of the world and the way that we interpret them.